I want to give you one word that is going to help you resolve stress in your life. Here we go with the final part of our series, A Christian's Mental Health. Luke, who wrote the Gospel of Luke, was also a trained physician, and he noticed something about Jesus. He records all of the growing up years of Jesus from basically 12 years old to 30 years old in one verse. And he says this: Jesus grew in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and in favor with men. So he tells us about this well-rounded growth of Jesus, that he grew, first of all, in his mental health. He grew in wisdom. Then he grew in stature, his physical health. He grew in favor with God, his spiritual health. And then finally, kind of the peak of all of that growth, he grew in favor with men. There's his relational health. But at the foundation is his mental health. If you don't make, and if I don't make good choices in my mental health, I'm not going to make good choices about the other areas that I'm going to grow in as well. And if we go through the Gospels, if we search in here in the life of Jesus, we never see him stressed out. We never see stress in his life. But stress can be a killer for you and I, can it? In fact, I think if you were to put down a list of all the things that rob us of peace and rob us of robust mental health, stress probably has to be up there near the top of the list, if not on the top of the list. So what can we learn from looking at the life of Jesus? And specifically today, I want to look at the life of people who have encountered Jesus and how did they deal with stress. Now, we've got to get a handle on stress, because if we don't, there are so many stressors around us. If we try to ignore them, if we try to just go, I'll deal with that later, or it's not that big of a deal. Here's what happens. This is our second mental health strategy that we talked about in this series. We talked about not fertilizing the weeds. What do we mean by that? Well, we mean that if you look out in your garden and you see a weed growing there, and you say, well, it's just a little tiny weed, and you just ignore the weed, you just say it's small, it's not that big of a deal, I'm just going to let that one go. What happens in the meantime to that root? It goes down farther into the ground, and it becomes a lot harder to get out later. So in essence, by ignoring the weed, we're really fertilizing the weed because we're allowing it to continue to get deeper roots there. It's the same thing with these stressors that we'll look at in our life. If we just go, it's not that big of a deal, it's just a small stressor, and we ignore it, in essence, we're allowing those roots to go farther down into our hearts and our minds, and it's going to really create a bigger problem later on. So we want to deal with these stressors right away. Now, God designed our bodies to handle stress. In fact, a appropriate amount of stress is good for us. It's beneficial for us. That's how muscles grow, because they go under stress. That's how relationships grow. When they go through stress and we resolve that, we come out with greater intimacy on the other side. Doctors refer to good stress as eustress, E-U-S-T-R-E-S-S. That's the good stress that allows us to grow in a good and healthy way, whether it's physically, mentally, relationally, spiritually. We go through that stressor, and then we come out stronger and healthier on the other side. But obviously, if we don't resolve it, then eustress can become distress, and that's the bad stress. Now, the way that our bodies respond to stress is by releasing a hormone that's called cortisol, and cortisol prepares us for action. God also designed our bodies to flush the excess cortisol out through two very important mechanisms. One is sleep, and the other one is good, healthy exercise. But you know what I've noticed in my life? Maybe you've noticed it in yours as well, that those two things are the two things that seem to get squeezed out of my life when I'm feeling stressed out. When I'm feeling stressed, it's hard for me to get a solid night's sleep. When I'm feeling stressed, I look at my calendar and I go, I don't know where I can fit exercise into my calendar. I've just got too many things to take care of here. But we've got to get a handle on that, because that unresolved stress in our body is taking a physical toll, and that can't help but have a mental toll on us as well. Let me share with you the results that Men's Health magazine shared about a study of what stress does to our physical bodies. Here's what they reported. You personally may dictate when you'll die. After studying 1,633 men for 30 years, Purdue scientists found that worrying takes 16 years off your life. Negative thinking triggers the release of cortisol, a stress hormone that can be dangerous when elevated for long periods of time. So let's think about this if we don't deal with those stressors. Okay, so stress comes along, cortisol is released. If we're not dealing with it properly, then we start to experience some of the negative behaviors. We're not sleeping well at night. Our diet becomes pretty poor. Some people don't eat at all when they're stressed out. Some people overeat when they're stressed out. I found a lot of times that people under severe stress will kind of go back and forth between those two things. They won't eat at all. And then when they finally eat, they eat way too much. And then they feel bad about that. And so then they don't eat at all. And then sometimes we stop exercising, as I mentioned already. Well, when we do that, then we start to develop some pretty poor coping skills. I mean, think about it. When you're tired, when you're so hungry that you've become hangry, or if you're feeling guilty because you just overate, you ate too much, and now you're feeling kind of bloated because of that, you're not exercising, and your body's starting to get stiffened up. Do you really have a lot of patience during that time? Can you deal with situations well during that time? Probably not. Those poor coping skills. Well, part of that has a physical root to it as well, because the excess cortisol, the cortisol that's not resolved and flushed from our body, especially attacks an area of our brains called the hippocampus. The hippocampus is largely the memory center of our brain. It's the one that allows us, when we're in a stressful situation, to kind of go, how did I handle this before? Maybe think through, I did it this way and I had a pretty good result, or I did it this way and it didn't turn out so well. We have that opportunity to kind of refresh our thoughts on that. Or maybe we say, I read something somewhere. I read it in my Bible, or I read it in an article, and then we're able to recall it. Well, when that part of our brain is literally under attack by this stress hormone that is building up and it's not being resolved, it's harder for us to come up with those things that we're searching for. We're like, how do I do this? Well, all of those things, unfortunately, create their own stress. And the whole cycle starts over again. More cortisol is released. We're making poor behavioral decisions again. We're having even more decreased behavioral and coping skills. And then there's more stress. And the cycle just continues on. And it can really take its toll in our physical bodies. As this report says right here, it can cut 16 years off of our life. But it also begins to take a toll in our mental health, and it usually shows up in the way that we interact with other people. In fact, what usually happens when we have a whole bunch of stress that's piling up on us is the first thing is we become very self-focused. We're thinking about, this hurts for me. This is stressful for me. This is really affecting my life. We become very self-focused. As a result of that, we tend to become very short-sighted. We're looking at, how can I make a decision for immediate relief? We're not thinking about long-term. And that's why sometimes we make those poor choices, maybe in our eating or in our lack of exercise. We're just looking for right now. We're looking at, okay, I got all these things on my plate right here, right now. What's one thing that I can just, okay, that's not critical. Let me just get rid of that. It's very short-sighted. And then the third thing that happens, so we become self-focused, we become very short-sighted in looking at things, and then we become very stingy. We become stingy with our time, with our possessions, and sadly for a lot of Christians, they become stingy with God's promises. They begin to think, well, I'm reading it here in the Bible, but that's for back then. That's not, I don't see how I can apply that to my life right now, because again, I'm still looking for such quick turnaround, such, let me just resolve this. Let me deal with this right now. I just got to get out of this situation. And I'm not thinking about the big picture. And so we add our own weight back to the stressors that we already have. And our worlds become smaller and smaller and smaller. They begin to turn in on us. And who's at the center of that? We put ourselves at the center of our own world. And then we add even more stress to ourselves by saying, I have to solve this problem. I have to get rid of this. I have to take care of. I need to do. And we build up the stress even to a higher level in our own lives because we're self-focused. We're short term in our thinking. We had a short window that we're looking at, and we're very stingy with the things that we're going to do. Well, I mentioned earlier that there's one word I'd like to give you. The thought to me came when I read this quote from the renowned psychologist William James. He said this: "The greatest weapon against stress is our ability to choose one thought over another." To choose one thought over another, to say, I'm going to do one thing differently. The one word that I want to give you, and it's also the one thing that you can do differently, is bless. If you will begin to take the focus off of yourself and bless someone else, maybe you bless them by a compliment or an encouraging word, or you come alongside and do something that's of service to them, something that's of benefit to them. It takes the focus off of you. When you bless other people, it takes the focus off of you. When you bless God, it puts the focus back on him. You're now no longer saying, hey, I have to solve all these problems. You look at the Bible and say, look at all these blessings that God has right here. Look at all these things that he can do. Why am I not letting him do those things? It just that one word, that one choice, that one decision to say, I don't have to solve all of these things. It's not all about me. Let me bless others and let me bless God. I want to show you a couple of examples in the Bible where we see this. The first one is in Luke's gospel. I thought I'd just stick with Luke since we looked at what he had to say about the growth of Jesus and see the same thoughts here of other people now. In Luke chapter 8, it says, after this, Jesus traveled about from one town and village to another, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom of God. The 12 were with him. That's his disciples. And there's also somebody else there. It says, and also some women who had been cured of evil spirits and diseases. And then it lists these names for us. Mary called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had come out. Joanna, the wife of Chuza, the manager of Herod's household. Susanna, and many others. Listen to this. These women were helping to support them, that's Jesus and his disciples, out of their own means. Now, can you imagine? These women are listed as being cured of evil spirits and diseases. Can you imagine the stress that they felt in their life trying to combat? How do I get rid of this evil spirit? How do I overcome this disease? Can you imagine the stress that comes as a result of that? But when they encounter Jesus and that is removed from them, they say, you know what? I don't want to go back to that. I don't want to go back to worrying about myself, being focused on myself, having this small world view and being stingy. I want to bless other people. And so it says out of their own means, they're supporting Jesus. Maybe they're making food for him. Maybe they're opening up their homes to let Jesus and his disciples have a place to stay. Maybe they're selling things in the marketplace and the money, the proceeds that they get from that, they're donating that to Jesus and his disciples so they can carry on their ministry. But the bottom line is they said, we don't want to focus on ourselves anymore. We want to bless other people. And at the same time, we want to bless God as well. Well, we see the similar story, the chapter just before this, Luke chapter 7. There is a woman that comes to meet Jesus. Jesus is at a Pharisee's house. He's having dinner. This Pharisee specifically has invited Jesus to dinner to try to entrap him. And so as a result, he is all of those things. He's very self-focused. He's very stingy. He's got a very small, short-sighted worldview because he's just standing there. You can almost imagine him with his arms closed, standing next to the wall, just watching Jesus. I'm just waiting for him to mess up. That's the whole reason why I brought him here, is so that I can keep my eyes on him and catch him in something. Well, there's a woman that's there, a woman that has not lived a really virtuous life, but she's encountered Jesus and her life has been changed. Now, the stress on her life, not living that way, and you can almost hear it in this story because as she comes over to bless Jesus, she begins to do all of the things that this host should have done, but didn't. because he was so self-focused on his agenda of trying to catch Jesus, he forgot that he was supposed to be a host. And so he didn't do things like wash Jesus's feet when he came in. He didn't give him a perfume to kind of refresh him from his journey. But this woman is doing all of those things. She's taking on all of those host duties. She's focused on Jesus. She's blessing him. And this guy, then you can hear the stress that she's had to deal with her whole life. He says, if this man, Jesus, was a prophet, he would know what kind of woman is touching him, and he wouldn't allow this to happen. And Jesus says, you know what? Leave her alone. She's doing for me what you should have done for me, but didn't, because you were too focused on your own agenda to be able to do that. But then he's got, in Matthew's gospel, Matthew records a couple of things that Jesus says, and I want you to see how then not only is she blessing Jesus, but how it becomes a blessing to us as well. Jesus said this, "Why are you bothering this woman? She's done a beautiful thing for me. Truly, I tell you, wherever this gospel is preached throughout the world, this is where we benefit from it, what she has done will also be told in memory of her." So we get a beautiful picture of somebody now who says, I'm not going to focus on those negative things that build up stress, all of those looks that I get. I can feel them when I walk down the street. I can feel people just looking at me. I can just kind of sense their thoughts. Oh, if people just knew what kind of woman she was. I'm not going to focus on those stressors. I'm not going to let that stress build up in my life, but I'm going to bless God. I'm going to bless others. In Luke chapter 8, later on, we also read about a man who has been demon possessed. He's been completely ostracized by the society. They try to chain him up out in the tombs outside of the town. They don't want him around anywhere, but he encounters Jesus and Jesus sets him free. But then listen to what happens. The townspeople come back in, and Luke writes down when they came back, they found him in his right mind. He's no longer out of his mind. He's no longer suffering those ravages of the stress of all of that stuff that was going on. But then it says at the end that of the story that this guy wants to go with Jesus now. Let me just stay with you. But it says this, when the man from whom the demons had gone out begged to go with him, Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return home and tell how much God has done for you." So the man went away and told all over town how much Jesus had done for him. When he basically came back to town and said, you know, all of the things that you tried to control me, all the things that maybe you tried to set me free before, none of those worked, did they? But an encounter with Jesus took care of all of that. So he said, I'm not going to give in to their negative thoughts. I'm not going to give in to the stressors that come from that. I'm going to continue to bless God, and I'm going to bless others by telling them the good news of freedom. Well, let me share with you one more. And this is, I think, very typical. This is a psalm that's written by David, but this is very typical of many of the psalms where people are in difficult situations. We will see them saying something like, I'm going to bless the Lord. I'm going to worship God, but I'm also going to call other people to this as well. I'm going to be a blessing both to God and to others. Well, in Psalm 34, we know that David is on the run from King Saul. He's not in Israel anymore. He's in the enemy territory of Philistia. In fact, the Philistines have now said, we think we have David trapped here. Maybe we should just eliminate him. Maybe we should get him out of the way. Talk about a stressful situation. And yet look at how David responds. The opening verse, I will extol the Lord at all times. His praise will always be on my lips. My soul will boast in the Lord. He's blessing God. But now listen to how he blesses other people. Let the afflicted hear and rejoice. Let other people that are feeling stressed out hear this and rejoice as well. And now listen to how he leads everybody together. He says, glorify the Lord with me and let us exalt his name together. So let me say it again. When we bless other people, it takes the focus off of ourselves. When we bless God, it puts the focus of all of us on him. And that is the way that we resolve stress, is by blessing. The best way to de-stress is to bless. We want to bless other people. We want to bless God. Now, one of the things that's difficult in this is that some people, David might have been in this case in Psalm 34, say, yeah, I don't feel like doing that. I'm just not feeling it right now. You know what I found? I found that feelings rarely motivate people to action, but good feelings almost always follow good actions. Let me give you a real simple example. I might not feel like exercising. I don't want to get up and work out. I just don't feel like doing it. But when I do it, the good feelings always follow. I'm glad that I did it. Do you hear what David said here in Psalm 34? Listen to this again. I will extol the Lord at all times. His praise will always be on my lips. He says, I don't feel like praising God right now. I'm in a really stressful, really tough situation. It would have been very easy for David to become very self-focused, for him to have a very short-sighted worldview, for him to become very stingy with God's promises, with his possessions, because of the situation he was in. I don't really feel like doing all these things, but he says, I will extol God, and his praise will be on my lips. And when I do that, other people now are really saying, wow, if David can praise God, if he can bless God during the situation, what would make us think that we can't either? And now let us praise God together. So think about the changes that start to take place. When instead of being self-focused, when I bless others, I become others-focused. You know, in the process of doing that, a lot of times I've discovered that my problems aren't as big as I thought that they were. When I start to go bless other people that are in need, when I'm maybe distributing food to a family that doesn't have enough food, and I think, oh, I've got food in my refrigerator and in my cupboards. My situation's pretty small compared to theirs. But what Proverbs tells us, what Solomon writes in the Proverbs, is that when we begin to bless other people, now that we don't do it for this reason, but when we begin to bless other people, we begin to receive a blessing back. Here's what he wrote. A generous person will prosper, and whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. We could easily just change that word refreshed to blessed. Whoever blesses other people will be blessed. I get a blessing just by seeing the gratitude when I've blessed other people. I receive that blessing, but in the same time, I also receive this blessing of my stress level is resolved a little bit. So, wow, now that I focus on somebody else, I've taken my eyes off my own problems. Well, we also talked about then becoming very short-sighted in our worldview. I'm just looking for a quick way to resolve this thing. Let me take you back to Psalm 34 with David here. I want to read the next verses. He says, those who look to him are radiant. Their faces are never covered with shame. And then he goes back to himself. He says, this poor man called, and the Lord heard him and saved him out of all his troubles. And that's what happens when we start to lift up our eyes and we start to say, hey, you know what? There is a bigger thing going on here. God can do something far beyond what my limited, stressful worldview had limited him to. But the third thing then is we said that we often become very stingy with God's promises. We become stingy with the possessions that we have. If we will begin to bless other people, begin to give those things away, there's a generosity that comes up in our heart. And I think generosity is one of the things that drives out stress almost more than anything else. Generosity and blessing almost are the same words. Well, Jesus, again, gave us a promise, gave us an assurance that if we'll be generous to other people, how it's going to continue to come back to us. He said it this way in Luke's gospel, give and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Remember earlier I talked about this sort of distress cycle when the cortisol builds up and we begin to make poor behavioral choices. And so the cortisol can't get flushed out of our body. And it's that hippocampus in our brain where brain cells are destroyed. Well, here's the really good news. When you start to resolve this stress and you start to de-stress by blessing and the cortisol starts to flush out of your body, The hippocampus is one of the few places in your brain that can do what's referred to as neurogenesis. It can grow new cells. Once you get the stress hormone resolved out of your body, then your body, your brain, can literally start healing that part of itself. And when your brain is healed, especially that hippocampus, then your mind is healed as well. So keep that in mind when Paul writes this to the Ephesians, and really writes it to us as well. Put off concerning your former conduct the old man which grows corrupt according to the deceitful lusts, and be renewed in the spirit of your mind, and that you put on the new man, which was created according to God in true righteousness and holiness. Friends, the best way to de-stress is to bless. It takes the focus off you, puts it on others. It takes the focus off of your problems and puts them on God's provision. That is how you can best resolve stress. Now, we've talked about a bunch of other strategies through this whole series. If you've missed any of them, I've shared a link below. Please check all of those out because they will all be beneficial to you. If there's something that I can help you out with, if you've got a question or a comment, or maybe you want me to pray with you about something, I've also shared a link below that is all these different ways that you can get in touch with me. Friends, don't let stress cut years off of your life and rob even life of the years that you have, but resolve the stress. The best way to de-stress is to bless. You can do it. God will help you if you will make that action. If you say, just like David did, I will resolve to praise God all the time. I'm going to bless him. I'm going to bless other people. I can't wait to hear your testimony of how your blessing others resolves your stress and helps you to be healthier. God bless you, friends. I love you.